Today, we're going to crack open a topic that affects every part of your life, but, often feels like a total mystery: the state budget. In this explainer, we're going to demystify it and see exactly what's inside. I mean, it's the question we all ask, right? You see that chunk of money vanish from your payslip every single month. But where does it go? Is it paving our roads, funding schools, paying for the military? Well, today, we're going to follow the money. Okay, so let's get into it. The easiest way to think about the state budget is like a coin. It's got two sides. One side is all the money coming in, that's the income. And the other side is all the money going out, the expenses. Simple enough. First up, let's look at the income side. So, how exactly does the government fill its wallet? Well, the short answer, as you probably guessed, is taxes. But it's not just one kind of tax, not by a long shot. The government's income really comes from all over the place. You've got the big ones everyone knows, like income tax and VAT, which you pay on pretty much everything you buy. But there's also health tax, purchase tax on specific things, and customs on stuff that's imported. Basically, the government gets a little piece of almost every economic transaction in the country. And yep, even that frustrating parking ticket you got last week, that contributes too. Let's just zoom in on income tax for a second, because it works on a really important principle. It's what's called a progressive tax. Now, that's just a fancy way of saying the more money you make, the higher the percentage of that money you pay in tax. The whole idea is to match the tax burden to someone's ability to actually pay it. So you take every single one of those taxes we mentioned, from income tax to those little customs fees, and you add them all up. The huge number you get before any money goes back out is called gross taxes, or misim bruto in Hebrew. This is the government's total haul for the year. So that's the key question, isn't it? The government collects this mountain of cash, but does it all just sit there, ready to be spent on services? Well, the answer is a definite no. A bunch of it goes right back out the door almost immediately. And this is where a huge chunk of it goes. It's a really crucial concept called transfer payments, or tashlumei ha'avara. This is money the government collects as tax and then transfers directly back to citizens. So think of things like child benefits, disability support, or unemployment payments. Okay, so this slide breaks it down perfectly. On the left, you've got gross taxes. That's every single shekel collected. But to figure out what the government actually has to work with, you have to subtract all those transfer payments. What's left over is called net taxes. This is the real number, the actual pot of money available for the budget. All right, now we know how much money the government has to play with, so let's flip that coin over and look at the other side. Where does all that cash actually end up going? So where does it all go? You can kind of think of government spending like a big pie, cut into three main slices. The biggest piece, by far, is something called public consumption. Then you have interest on debt, and finally, other fixed costs like pensions. So let's take a look at each piece. Let's start with the absolute giant on the list, public consumption. This is basically the cost of running the country day to day. But what does that actually mean in practice? It really boils down to two main things. First, paying people. We're talking about the salaries for all public sector employees, the teachers in our kids' schools, the doctors in our hospitals, the police officers on our streets. The second part is buying things from private companies. Computers for government offices, tanks for the army, or even the food that gets served in public hospitals. Okay, so after you pay for all the people and all the stuff you need to run the country, what's another massive bill the government has to pay year after year? Well, it's for money that was actually spent a long, long time ago. That's right. The government, just like a person or a company, takes out loans to cover its costs when spending is higher than income. And just like any other loan, it comes with interest. These interest payments are a huge, non-negotiable part of the budget. Just look at that number for a second. 100 billion. It's a number so big, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. So what does a number like that actually represent in the budget? This slide helps put it into perspective. Now, just to be clear, this is a hypothetical example to show you the sheer scale of it. If the national debt was 1 trillion shekels and the interest rate was 10%, the government would have to pay 100 billion shekels that year, just in interest. That is 100 billion shekels that can't be spent on anything else. But what's really fascinating is how this has changed over time. If you go back to the 1980s, these interest payments ate up a staggering 30% of the entire budget. Today, thanks to things like lower interest rates, it's down to about half that. But still, 15% is an enormous slice of the pie that's already gone before you even start talking about new spending. So we've seen money coming in and we've seen money going out. Now let's put it all together and look at the central challenge of any government, trying to make those two sides balance. And here's the crucial point. Not all expenses are the same. Some costs, like those interest payments we just talked about or certain government pensions, are pretty much set in stone. They are fixed obligations. The government has to pay them no matter what. And this quote really brings us to the heart of the matter. This is the fundamental trade-off. When those mandatory fixed costs start to grow, they begin to squeeze everything else out. The amount of money that's left over for things like healthcare, education, or infrastructure, it starts to shrink. And that's really the question to leave you with. At the end of the day, every budget is a story about choices and priorities. And understanding the difference between the money that must be spent and the money that can be spent, well, that's the key to understanding the incredibly difficult decisions our leaders face every single year. Hey there. Whenever you hear politicians going back and forth about spending or taxes, what they're really talking about is the government budget deficit. It's this huge number that, believe it or not, affects pretty much everything: our economy, our future, the whole deal. So what exactly is it? And more importantly, why should you care? Let's dig in. It sounds pretty simple, right? What happens when the government spends more money than it brings in? We all know what happens with our own wallets. When more cash goes out than comes in, you've got a problem. But when a government does it, well, the consequences are on a whole different level. They ripple through the entire economy. And honestly, getting the answer to this one question is the key to understanding this entire topic. All right, so the easiest way to wrap your head around this is to picture the government having this gigantic wallet. Just like ours, there's money coming in and there's money going out. Super simple. Let's break down both sides of that equation. First up, the money coming in. In the world of economics, you'll often see this represented by the letter T. And yep, T stands for taxes. This is pretty much all the revenue the government collects, from you, from me, from businesses. It's the income side of the ledger. And then on the flip side, you've got G, and that's for government spending. This is all the money going out. We're talking about everything from public schools and fixing roads to military salaries and healthcare programs. All the stuff the government pays for to keep the country up and running. Okay, so now we have our T for income and our G for spending. When you put those two together, the math can only really go one of three ways for the government's budget. And this is where it all clicks into place. Look, if T, your income, is greater than G, your spending, you've got yourself a budget surplus. You can think of it as positive savings for the year. Pretty cool. Now, if they're exactly equal, the budget is perfectly balanced. No savings, but no debt either. But when G is greater than T, when that spending gets ahead of the income, that is what we call a budget deficit. Okay, this brings us to something that trips a ton of people up. I'll admit, it gets me sometimes too. You hear the words deficit and debt thrown around in the news almost like they're the same thing, but they are absolutely not. Let's untangle these two right now. Right, so here's the most important thing to remember about a deficit. It's a short-term thing. It's the shortfall for a single year. So if the government overspends by, say, $50 billion this year, then this year's deficit is $50 billion. It's just a snapshot in time. Debt, on the other hand, is the long game. It's the big picture, the grand total. Debt is what you get when you add up all the deficits from all the previous years. It's the total cumulative amount of money the government owes from all that borrowing over time. This slide here shows you exactly how that works. Imagine each year's deficit is like adding another brick to a wall. That $50 billion deficit in year one, that's one brick. Then another $70 billion the next year. That's a bigger brick. Then another $60 billion. Year after year, these bricks just keep piling up. And eventually, they create this massive structure that we call the national debt. Okay, so if a deficit basically means the government is in the red, spending more than it earns, that's got to be a bad thing, right? Well, you might be surprised. It's actually a lot more complicated than that. And this, right here, is really the core debate in public finance. We're all taught from a young age that you've got to balance your budget, right? Don't spend more than you make. So it just feels irresponsible for a government to do it. But are there times when it's not just okay, but maybe even necessary? And the answer, as it often is with big economic questions, isn't a simple yes or no. To figure out if a deficit is good or bad, you have to ask a much more important question. Why is the government overspending in the first place? And it turns out there are some really clear-cut reasons. Think about a national emergency, a war, a huge natural disaster, or something like a pandemic. In those moments, a government can't just pause and say, hold on, we need to raise taxes first. No way. It has to spend money, and spend it now, to protect its people and its economy. In situations like that, a deficit actually becomes a critical tool for managing a crisis. But it's a tool that comes with a really hefty price tag down the road. Which leads us perfectly into the final, and maybe most important piece of this puzzle. If the government is spending all this extra money, who actually pays the bill? So, let's think about that. The government needs to spend a bunch of money fast in an emergency, but the tax money just isn't there to cover it. Where does that cash actually come from? It's not like it just appears out of thin air. Well, the simple and kind of tough answer is this. A deficit today is paid for by borrowing, and all that borrowing eventually has to be repaid. How? Usually by raising taxes on citizens in the future. And this really gets to the heart of the matter. As one economist put it, today's spending is at the expense of the future generation. It's a direct trade-off. Every single dollar of deficit spending today is a dollar, plus interest, don't forget the interest, that will have to be paid back by our kids and grandkids. And that's the crucial takeaway here. This whole idea of an intergenerational trade-off means that even though deficits can be a really important tool in a crisis, they are absolutely not a free lunch. It means governments have this profound responsibility to weigh the needs of today against the burden they're placing on tomorrow. So we'll leave you with this to think about. When a government knows for a fact that the bill will be passed on to the next generation, what is its true responsibility when it decides to spend money it doesn't actually have? It's honestly one of the biggest and most important questions in all of public finance. Thanks so much for joining us. You see it in the news all the time, right? These headlines about governments spending billions and billions of dollars. But what do those huge numbers actually mean for the economy? And, for us. Let's break it all down. Okay, so picture this. You're scrolling through the news and a headline pops up. Government deficit soars to $30 billion. Your immediate thought is probably, whoa, that is a ton of money. But hang on, let me ask you a question. Is $30 billion a big deficit or a small one? Is it a crisis in the making, or is it just business as usual? The honest truth is, just by looking at that number alone, it's completely impossible to say. It has absolutely no context. So to figure out if a number like 30 billion is actually a big deal, economists have a trick. They don't just stare at the number itself. They use a really important economic measuring stick to put it in perspective. And that measuring stick is the country's gross domestic product, or GDP for short. Just think of GDP as a big snapshot of the total size of a country's entire economy over 1 year. It's the whole shebang. So, and this is really the key takeaway here, we never look at a deficit number in a vacuum. To really get what's going on, we always measure it as a percentage of the entire economy, of the GDP. And the maths? It's actually really simple. You just take the deficit for the year, in our case 30 billion, and you divide it by the country's total GDP for that same year. Let's just say, for this example, the GDP is 1,000 billion. So you do that little bit of division and boom. That $30 billion deficit is actually 3% of the economy. Now that is a number we can finally work with. It's all about the context. Okay, so we've got our magic number, 3%. But now what? Is 3% good? Is it bad? Is it just average? Well, it turns out there's a pretty common rule of thumb for this. See, that 3% isn't just some random number. It's actually a widely recognized international benchmark. Generally speaking, a deficit around 3% of GDP is seen as manageable, a sustainable level for a healthy economy. To see this in action, take Israel. Before the recent war, its deficit was right around that 3% target. But with all the new spending, it's expected to shoot up to 5, 6, or maybe even 7%. And a jump like that, that's when economists start waving some serious red flags. That signals real economic stress. Because as that percentage gets higher and higher, it's a sign that a government spending is spiraling out of control. You can't just run a deficit of, say, 10% or 20% forever. It's just not sustainable, and it means there are some pretty serious consequences down the road.
And that brings us perfectly to the other side of this coin, the national debt. Now, you hear people use deficit and debt like they're the same thing all the time, but they're not. They are connected for sure, but they are two different things.
Here's the easiest way to think about it. A deficit is just the shortfall for one single year. It's like you spent more money this month than you made in your paycheck. The debt, though, that's the grand total of all those past yearly deficits all piled up together. It's your total outstanding credit card balance that's been building for years. And guess what? To understand if a country's debt is a big problem, we use the exact same trick we used for the deficit. We measure the total debt as a percentage of GDP. It's the only way to really understand the true scale of the numbers. Okay, so we've got these percentages for deficits and debt. We know how to calculate them. But the big question is, why does any of this actually matter? What are the real-world consequences when these numbers start to get too high? Well, it comes down to something that works a lot like your personal credit score. There's a really clear relationship here. As a country's deficit and debt percentages go up and up, its official credit rating tends to go down and down. And a lower credit rating, well, that's bad news. It tells global investors, hey, this country is becoming a riskier bet. And when you're seen as risky, it gets harder and, more importantly, more expensive to borrow money. This can kick off a really dangerous cycle where higher debt leads to higher interest payments, which just creates even more debt. And that leaves us with a huge question for the future. We live in a world with growing conflicts, pandemics, and all sorts of economic uncertainty. So, are these old rules of thumb, like that 3% guideline, still going to work? Or will the economic rules of the game have to change to fit this new reality? It's something to think about.